All right, let's go. Number 10. The Cave City. China forgot to record. In June 1992, a group of villagers in Longyou County, Zhejiang Province, began pumping water from what they assumed was a flooded pond. The pump ran for 17 days. As the water level dropped, the outline of a carved stone chamber emerged from the darkness. Then another. Then more spreading outward in every direction beneath the fields and paths they had walked across their entire lives. By the time the pumping stopped, the villagers had uncovered not a flooded field, but the entrance to one of the largest underground complexes in the ancient world, a system of caverns that no surviving historical record had ever mentioned. The Longyou Grottoes, as they are now known, consist of at least 36 individual chambers carved from sandstone in the hills of eastern China. The chambers are massive, with ceilings that rise, in some cases to 30 meters, and floors that span areas comparable to a city block. The entire complex extends across a total area of roughly 30,000 square meters, all of it carved by hand, without any machinery capable of matching what the surfaces show was done. Each chamber connects to others through carved archways and passages, forming a network, rather than a collection of isolated rooms. The most perplexing feature is not the scale, it is the walls. Every surface in the Longyou Grottoes, every wall, every ceiling, every column, is covered in a parallel pattern of chisel marks applied in consistent diagonal lines running across the stone without interruption. The pattern is not random. It holds a uniform angle and spacing that suggests a single design principle applied across the entire complex by a workforce operating with coordinated intent. No two sections of wall appear to have been carved by independent crews working without a shared template. The marks are precise enough to indicate either a very tightly controlled construction program or a technique whose details were deliberately never committed to writing. The Longyou Grottoes have been dated to approximately the 2nd century BCE, placing them in the Qin or early Han Dynasty, a period of intensive administrative record-keeping in China. The Han Dynasty produced official histories, engineering records, census data, and bureaucratic correspondence in extraordinary volume and detail. The Qin Dynasty that preceded it was, if anything, even more relentlessly documented. Yet no known historical source from any dynasty at any period makes any reference to the construction use or existence of anything resembling these caverns. No tools were found inside. No rubble from the excavation has been found nearby. The approximate volume of stone removed to create the chambers has been estimated at over 1 million cubic meters. That material had to go somewhere. Yet the surrounding landscape shows no obvious spoil heaps, no ancient fill layers that would account for what a removal operation of that scale would have produced. Fan Jianping of the Zhejiang Provincial Institute of Cultural Relics and Archaeology led early investigations at the site and documented the absence of any organic remains, pottery inscriptions, or artifacts that might indicate how the space was used after it was built. Whether these were warehouses, sacred spaces, administrative centers, or something without a modern equivalent has not been determined. What can be said with confidence is this: someone excavated more than 1 million cubic meters of stone, covered every surface in a coordinated pattern, left nothing behind that identifies themselves, and then disappeared entirely from the historical record. The mechanism of that disappearance, whether deliberate concealment, administrative collapse, or something else, has not been found. Number 9. The refuge city beneath the Iranian desert. Stand in the central square of Aran Vabidgul in Isfahan province, Iran, and the ground beneath looks no different from any other town in the region. The streets are dusty in summer and cold in winter. The houses are built of mud brick and plaster. The bazaar occupies its ancient position at the center of the settlement, and the surrounding desert stretches to the horizon in every direction. Nothing here announces what lies underneath. Below the surface of this town, carved through multiple levels of earth and rock, is a city. It is known locally as Uyi, and it belongs to one of the most complete underground refuge systems that has survived from the Sassanid period, the Persian Empire that controlled this territory from the 3rd to the 7th century of the Common Era. The passages of Oyi are narrow by design. In places they are no wider than 60 to 70 centimeters, enough for one person to move through at a time, but narrow enough to prevent a mounted soldier or a group advancing at speed from pressing forward effectively. The system descends through at least 3 levels, each offering its own network of chambers and corridors. Throughout these passages, the temperature holds at approximately 16 degrees Celsius year-round, regardless of what the desert above is doing, rising to 45 degrees in summer, dropping below freezing at night in winter. The underground city was, among other things, a refrigerator for an entire population. Water channels were cut into the floors. Storage chambers held food and supplies across multiple levels, organized in a way that suggests both long-term habitation planning and a clear understanding of how weight and moisture behaved in the rock above. Spaces for livestock were built into the lower sections, with ventilation shafts, angled specifically to draw air from the surface without revealing their exact positions to anyone searching from above. The angle of these shafts was not accidental. A shaft positioned vertically betrays itself through heat, shimmer, or sound. One cut obliquely through the rock dissipates both. The builders understood this. The entrances scattered across the town, concealed in basements and beneath floor stones, could be sealed from within. To someone moving above on the surface, they were simply part of the architecture around them. To someone below, they were the boundary between safety and exposure. The Sassanid period was one of sustained military pressure incursions from the East Roman campaigns from the west, and eventually the Arab conquests that brought the empire to an end in 651 CE. Oyi was not built for comfort. It was built for survival. The engineering reflects a detailed understanding of what survival required: concealment, temperature regulation, water access, controlled airflow, defensible narrow points, and enough capacity to sustain a large number of people for an extended period without moving to the surface. The knowledge of which floorstones concealed entrances, which passages connected to which exits, and how to navigate the system in darkness, this knowledge would have been held selectively. Not everyone in the town above would have known the same things. Some entrances existed to be known, others presumably existed to be forgotten by most people in ordinary times. When construction workers broke through into one of Oyi's passages during modern work on the town, the full extent of the system began to emerge for the first time in the contemporary era. Sections of the complex are still being documented. The chambers contain no paintings, no inscriptions. They were not meant to impress anyone who had not already been trusted with the location of an entrance. The people who used those passages are gone. The spaces they carved remain exactly as they were left. Number 8. The Iron Age passages that no one has explained begin with a single object, a flat stone approximately 2 meters long, resting horizontally across 2 upright stones. Below it, the ground drops away into a darkness that nothing on the surface had indicated was there. The stones were not worked into any precise shape. They were selected, placed, and have held their position for more than 2,000 years. These linteled passages, called souterrains in academic literature from the French for underground, appear in their hundreds across Scotland, Ireland, and the Brittany coast of France. They are Iron Age in origin, built between approximately 600 and 100 BCE, usually alongside or directly attached to surface settlements, whose residents clearly knew they were there. The construction is dry stone flat slabs and upright supports placed without mortar, relying on compression and careful selection of stone. Many have survived intact. Almost none have yielded an explanation. In Orkney, Scotland, an earth house at Rennebister was exposed on the 12th of November 1926, when a farm threshing machine broke through its roof. The chamber beneath measured approximately 3.3 by 2.5 meters, with a corbelled ceiling supported on 4 stone pillars and 5 alcoves cut into the surrounding walls. Inside were the skeletal remains of 6 adults and 12 children, a minimum of 18 individuals, dated to the Middle and Late Iron Age, meaning they had been deposited there several hundred years after the earth house itself was constructed. No tools, no grave goods, No evidence of fire or deliberate burial preparation accompanied the remains. Wrennebister is the only souterrain in Scotland where human remains have been found. The space had not been built as a tomb. Whatever it had been built as it was used as one. That reuse is itself a kind of evidence. A community living alongside a structure they no longer understood, or perhaps no longer used for its original purpose, found it suitable for depositing the dead. Whether this was a repurposing of convenience, or something that required a decision that these people belonged in this space, specifically, is impossible to say. What it tells us is that the space was still considered meaningful enough to use at all. And it shares with hundreds of others the central problem. No one knows what these structures were originally for. Theories include food storage. The stable underground temperature would have made that practical through the year, along with seasonal refuge, ritual space, and concealment during raids. Each theory has evidence pointing toward it in some sites, and evidence that contradicts it in others. No single explanation has survived its contact with all the available cases. Most souterrains contain no artifacts. They show no evidence of fire, which eliminates heating as a primary function. They are typically too low to stand upright, in which makes agricultural storage awkward as a daily practice. Some connect directly to what appear to be domestic buildings. Others stand free in the landscape with no obvious surface structure nearby. In Ireland, where souterrains are densest, thousands have been identified across the island without any single clear pattern of use emerging. What the builders shared across all three regions was a specific technical tradition. The linteled passage, the corbelled ceiling, the careful selection of flat stones that concealed entrance. That tradition spread across a considerable geographic range and persisted for several centuries. The fact that it appears in Scotland, Ireland, and Brittany, three regions connected by the Atlantic Sea routes that Iron Age communities used for exchange, suggests deliberate transmission, that someone carried the knowledge of how to build these things across the distances involved, and that communities in each region found it worth adopting and maintaining. The tradition was clearly shared. No one recorded what was supposed to happen inside once the lintel stone was lowered back into place. The technique is recoverable from what survived. The knowledge of what those spaces were used for and what it meant to the people who went into them is not. Number 7. The Andean galleries built to roar. The valley in which Chavin de Huantar sits is high in the Peruvian Andes, at roughly 3,177 meters above sea level. The site lies at the confluence of two rivers, the Masna and the Huachexa, a positioning that, in Andean cosmological thought, marked a threshold between the human world and the forces that moved beneath it. Travelers arriving from the eastern lowlands would have crossed jungle and climbed through cloud forest. Those coming from the coast would have crossed the Pacific Desert and ascended through agricultural terraces. From either direction, the journey would have taken days. The stone structures at the valley's center, massive, angular, decorated with carved stone heads and relief panels, would have been visible from some distance above. What was not visible was what the buildings contained. Chavin de Huantar was occupied as a ceremonial center from approximately 900 to 200 BCE, placing it among the earliest major architectural complexes in the Americas. The above-ground structures are substantial platforms, plazas, sunken courtyards, stone facades bearing intricate carved relief. But the buildings are not merely solid. Running through them is a network of interior galleries and ventilation shafts, carefully engineered to produce effects that no pilgrim arriving after a week of travel through mountain terrain would have had any framework to anticipate. The galleries are low and narrow. Anyone moving through them does so in near total darkness, with no view beyond a few feet ahead. The passages turn in ways that destroy the sense of direction, and the acoustic properties of the stone amplify even the sound of breathing. At specific points within the system, the geometry creates conditions in which sounds travel in directions that do not correspond to where their source seems to be. And at certain resonant frequencies, the stone transmits vibration through the walls themselves. John Rick of Stanford University, who has led extensive research at Chavin de Huantar for several decades, has documented how the ventilation shafts direct sound through the complex in ways that would have been both disorienting and unmistakably purposeful to anyone experiencing them for the first time. A pilgrim who had walked for a week to reach this valley, and who entered these galleries having never encountered designed acoustics, would have had no framework for what was happening to them. What makes this particularly significant is not the acoustic engineering alone. It is what that engineering was built to receive. Chavin de Huantar appears to have functioned as an oracle center, a place where priests concealed behind decorated stone screens could project their voices toward pilgrims waiting in the courts below while remaining entirely out of sight. The Lanzan, a carved stone monolith standing 4.5 meters at the core of the gallery system, was positioned so that sound directed through an opening above it would seem to originate from the stone. The effect was not subtle. Chemical analysis of vessels and residues at the site has identified San Pedro cactus, which contains mescaline, indicating that the sensory experience of visiting Chavin was not limited to architecture and sound alone. Darkness disorientation, sound from impossible directions, and a psychoactive compound administered in ritual context. This was a total environment. Pilgrims who arrived in this valley had traveled far enough to commit entirely to the journey. What they encountered was an institution that had used stone topography, sound chemistry, and darkness to construct an experience that felt categorically different from everything outside. The gallery system was not a byproduct of construction. It was a designed instrument operated by people who understood precisely what it could do. The site was eventually abandoned, with the ceremonial complex falling into disuse sometime around 200 BCE. The tradition it maintained, the specific knowledge of how to build this kind of space, how to operate it, what each ventilation shaft was calibrated to produce, and what the correct ritual procedure was for moving a pilgrim through darkness toward a voice that seemed to come from stone, left no written record. The galleries remain. The knowledge of how to work them does not. Number 6. Matera. The received account of Matera holds that it is a city of cave dwellings in southern Italy, one of the oldest continuously inhabited settlements on Earth, a place finally recognized as a cultural treasure, only after spending most of the 20th century being treated as a national embarrassment. That account is accurate as far as it goes, but it describes only the surface. The Sassi di Matera, the two districts of cave dwellings carved into the ravines below the city's high ridge, sit in Basilicata, the instep of the Italian peninsula. The earliest human occupation of these ravines has been dated to approximately 9000 BCE. People have lived in these gorges, in these specific caves, and the rock shelters between them without significant interruption for 11,000 years. What that continuity produced is not one layer of a city, but dozens. Each generation carved deeper into the volcanic tuff, added passages to existing spaces, converted animal shelters into churches, converted churches into cisterns, converted cisterns into homes. The city visible today is not built on top of its past. It is its past rearranged and extended and built over so many times that the original rock face is effectively invisible beneath the accumulated decisions of 110 centuries of habitation. Beneath the visible cave fronts, a second system runs in relative obscurity. More than 100 cisterns have been documented in the Sassi, connected by a network of aqueducts carved directly from the tuff. The system works like a series of filters. Rainwater falling on the exposed rock above is collected at the surface, channeled into sloped passages, cut at precise angles, and directed through successive chambers where particulate matter settles out before the water reaches the storage cisterns below. This is not improvised engineering. It is a solution refined over generations to the specific problem of water collection in a semi-arid limestone environment with unpredictable seasonal rainfall. And it produced a supply reliable enough to sustain a population of tens of thousands through dry summers in a region that receives less rain annually than most of Northern Europe. The cistern network was not a medieval addition to an older city. It was integral to the cave system from early periods extended and elaborated as the population above it grew. Below the cisterns are drainage systems, airflow shafts, and structural passages that allowed the cave city to function as an integrated whole rather than a collection of individual dwellings. The relationship between the surface, the inhabited caves, and the underground infrastructure was managed by a population that accumulated and passed down precise knowledge about how the rock behaved, where the water moved, which walls bore structural load, and which passages connected to which cisterns. A family that altered their dwelling without understanding what lay below it might cut through a structural element that supported 3 levels of habitation above or break into a drainage channel that routed water away from a dozen households. In 1945, writer Carlo Levi published Christ Stopped at Eboli, a memoir of his internal exile in Basilicata during the fascist period. His descriptions of cave-dwelling families in Matera children sleeping alongside livestock families crowded into single rooms. Tuberculosis, moving through the population without resources to contain it, reached a national audience. In 1952, Prime Minister Alcide de Gasperi visited the Sassi and declared them a national disgrace. Between 1952 and 1963, approximately 15,000 residents were forcibly relocated to modern apartment blocks on the plateau above. The caves were emptied. The water system fell into disuse. The detailed knowledge of how the cisterns connected and which passages were structural rather than decorative began to disappear with the generation that had managed them, because that generation had moved to apartments with running water central heating and no pressing reason to explain the old system to anyone. When UNESCO added Matera to its World Heritage List in 1993, and when the city was named European Capital of Culture, for 2019, the caves were repopulated with hotels and restaurants. Visitors now sleep in chambers that were condemned 60 years earlier. The underground infrastructure below them is still being mapped. Number 5. The tunnel sealed for 1,800 years. In the fall of 2003, a period of sustained heavy rain swept through the ruins of Teotihuacan, the pre-Aztec city, located approximately 30 miles northeast of present-day Mexico City. Archaeological dig sites flooded. Mud moved across the plazas. One morning, Sergio Gomez Chavez, an archaeologist with Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History, arrived at the southern end of the city's central axis to find that a sinkhole approximately 3 feet wide had opened at the foot of the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. Gomez tied a rope around his waist and was lowered by his colleagues into the opening. At the bottom in the dark, he came to rest in a passage blocked in both directions by large stones. He recognized the construction as deliberate. The stones had been placed to seal the passage, not because they had fallen or shifted. He could not see how far it extended, and the ceiling was too complete to press through without tools he did not have with him. He was raised back to the surface. He told his colleagues he believed they were looking at one of the most significant discoveries in the history of Mexico. 6 years passed before excavation began. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in the interval revealed a tunnel running approximately 103 meters in an almost perfectly straight, entirely artificial line from the temple's outer plaza to 3 chambers positioned directly beneath the pyramid center, approximately 17 meters below the surface. The actual entrance, located some distance from where the sinkhole had opened, had been sealed with large boulders nearly 1,800 years before. The sealing had been done with care and intent. Whatever was placed inside was meant to remain there permanently. Excavations began in 2009 and 2010. The team removed close to 100,000 tons of earth. What emerged was not the royal tomb Gomez had anticipated finding. It was something considerably less familiar. The walls of the tunnel had been coated in powdered pyrite fool's gold, applied so that reflected light would create a shimmering effect across every surface, as though the passage were lined with captured starlight. Entering it by torchlight would have produced an effect unlike any underground experience. The ancient world otherwise offers a passage that appeared to glow from within, with no identifiable light source of its own. In the 3 chambers at the far end, excavators found a miniature landscape of carved surfaces with pools of liquid mercury collected in the low points between sculpted peaks. The mercury represented lakes or rivers, reflecting a Mesoamerican cosmological model in which the primordial world emerged from a watery void. This concept aligned precisely with the marine imagery covering the pyramid's exterior facade above shells, feathered serpents, and wave patterns carved across the stone, the entire structure. From buried passage to pyramid apex, conceived as a single representation of the moment before creation gave form to the world. More than 50,000 objects were recovered from the tunnel and chambers. Jade and greenstone figurines, jaguar remains, rubber balls used in the Mesoamerican ball game, obsidian blades and arrowheads, conch shells, pyrite mirrors, seeds from multiple plant species, carved wooden objects, and fragments of what analysis suggested was human skin. 2 of the greenstone figurines were found still in their original positions, leaning back and facing upward toward the axis point where Mesoamerican cosmology understood the 3 planes of the universe to converge as though left to keep watch from below over the pyramid that rose above them. No royal tomb was found. No inscription named the figures or identified the purpose of the space. The tunnel was filled with a complete representation of the universe, as the builders of Teotihuacan understood it, assembled by people who then sealed the entrance with boulders, and as far as the evidence shows, never returned. Gomez had expected a royal burial because every comparable Mesoamerican site had produced one, and the quality and quantity of the offerings suggested something of equivalent significance. That expectation went unmet. What that representation was constructed to do, consecrate the pyramid's seal. A founding act, enact a cosmological claim in permanent material, is exactly what the absence of a named figure and the absence of any inscription leaves permanently open. Number 4. The labyrinth Herodotus visited and archaeology has never found. The ancient writers were not inclined toward exaggeration about things they had seen with their own eyes, and Herodotus was careful to distinguish between what he had witnessed and what he had merely heard described. When he wrote about a building near Lake Moeris in the Fayum region of Egypt, he noted that he had been shown through a portion of it and refused entry to the rest. He counted 3,000 rooms, 1,500 above ground, 1,500 below. He described the upper floors in terms he did not use for the pyramids. He had also seen the labyrinth surpass them, in his view, surpassed every other structure he had encountered in his travels across the ancient world. The courts were roofed with stone. The passages connecting them were tortuous enough to require a guide. He was told the lower floors contained the tombs of the kings who had built the structure and the sacred crocodiles they had kept. He was not permitted to enter them. Strabo visited the same region, roughly 4 centuries later, and described a complex of similar dimensions, noting that the labyrinth still received visitors in his day and still astonished them. Diodorus Siculus described it from written sources, recording its reputation as one of the wonders of Egypt. Pliny the Elder measured it and recorded the exterior dimensions in his Natural History, an enclosure of approximately 400 stades containing, by his count, 12 roofed halls and 1,500 rooms on each of 2 levels. Their accounts differ in certain details, different writers emphasizing different features, different numbers for the courts, but agree on the fundamentals: a building of extraordinary size, multiple levels, a labyrinthine interior that defeated orientation, and a function connected to royalty and ritual. Every ancient source places it in approximately the same location, the Fayum Basin, southwest of what is now Cairo, near the site of Hawara. 5 independent writers across 6 centuries describe the same building in the same place. This is not legend. This is repeated eyewitness testimony about a structure that physically existed. The structure they were describing was built by Amenemhat III, a pharaoh of the 12th dynasty, who ruled during the 19th century BCE. His pyramid at Hawara still stands in badly deteriorated condition beside the desert site where the labyrinth was described as having stood. When Flinders Petrie excavated at Hawara in 1888 and 1889, he found the pyramid and a surrounding landscape of stone debris chip shards. and fragments consistent with the large-scale dismantling of a very large building spread across an area, roughly matching the dimensions the ancient writers had described. The debris was not random. Petrie could see that it represented the remnant of a structure that had been deliberately taken apart, block by block, over an extended period, by people who knew what they were doing and wanted the stone for something else. Petrie recognized what this meant. The labyrinth had existed. It had been pulled apart methodically and completely over the centuries, the stone removed for reuse elsewhere, most likely during the Roman period, when Egypt's older monuments were extensively quarried for building material. He found no standing walls, no underground chambers, no plan that could be followed. In 2008, a research team using ground-penetrating radar surveyed the Hawara site and found evidence of regular subsurface structures, geometric patterns consistent with a large architectural complex of significant depth beneath the debris field. The survey indicated that a building of scale did stand here, and that what remained below the current surface was either filled, collapsed, or intact. The available technology could not determine which. The structure that 5 separate ancient writers described in detail the building Herodotus considered the greatest he had ever encountered has not been entered in the modern era. The testimony exists. The quarry waste exists. The subsurface anomaly exists. The rooms are not there. The plan is not there. The 1/500 lower chambers that Herodotus was refused entry to the rooms that contained, he was told the tombs of kings and the bones of sacred crocodiles have never been identified, confirmed, or recovered. Archaeology has produced the footprint and the rubble. It has not produced the interior, and it has not produced anything resembling what those 5 writers agreed was in the rooms they were not permitted to see. Number 3. Orvieto. The city of Orvieto occupies the flat summit of a volcanic tufa plateau, rising approximately 325 meters above the Paglia River Valley in Umbria, central Italy. From below, approaching from any direction, what you see is a near vertical cliff face of golden brown volcanic stone, with the city compressed onto the top as though placed there deliberately. The Etruscans built their city of Velsna on this plateau in approximately the 6th century BCE, and the reason for the choice of site was not aesthetic. Nothing on that cliff could be stormed from below without enormous losses. The Romans understood this when they took it in 264 BCE. Medieval authorities understood it again when they fortified it during the conflicts of the following centuries. The visible city above has changed hands, been rebuilt, and been modified repeatedly over more than 2,000 years. The invisible city below has been in continuous use since the Etruscans first began cutting into the tufa. More than 1,200 caves, tunnels, cisterns, passages, and chambers have been documented beneath the streets and buildings of modern Orvieto. The system runs in some places 3 and 4 levels deep, each layer connected to others by shafts and carved stairs. The tufa compressed volcanic ash that hardens on exposure to air, but is soft during cutting, made each generation more inclined to extend the existing system than to construct new infrastructure on the surface. Stone that yields to an iron chisel that holds its shape once the cut face hardens, that does not require mortar or timber formwork to stay in place. For the Etruscans, the plateau was not just a defensive position. It was a material they could work with everything they had. What the Etruscans created, the Romans modified for their own requirements. What the Romans left medieval residents extended. Spaces that began as Etruscan olive oil presses became Roman wine cellars and then medieval storage vaults. Cisterns built to hold water for a population under siege were later converted into columbaria pigeon houses, structured towers of carved niches in which birds were bred in considerable numbers. The eggs and meat providing a reliable protein source. Through winters when the roads into the valley were impassable and other supplies ran low. The scale of the columbaria that have been documented in Orvieto's underground suggests that pigeon breeding was not a minor or incidental activity. It was a managed food supply organized within a network of caves that had originally been carved for other purposes entirely, by people who had long since stopped thinking about what those original purposes were. In some passages, medieval potters built kilns directly into the tufa walls, using the insulating mass of the surrounding rock to maintain firing temperatures that surface kilns could not hold as consistently. In other sections, grain mills were installed to take advantage of the stable underground airflow, which moved at a predictable rate through passages that opened at different elevations on the cliff face. An Etruscan well documented beneath a building on the Via della Cava in 1984 proved to have been used, modified, deepened, and cleaned through several distinct historical periods until comparatively recently, the mechanism for drawing water from it still in place when the building above was renovated. When archaeologists and city authorities undertook a coordinated survey of the underground in the 1990s, the working assumption was that what lay beneath Orvieto was primarily historical residue. Etruscan in origin, later extended but secondary to the city that had grown above it. What the documentation found instead was a functional city that had operated in parallel with the surface throughout Orvieto's entire recorded history. The caves were not abandoned remnants preserved by neglect. They were active spaces that most of the surface buildings had maintained direct connections to. Used week by week for storage production, water supply, and food preservation, and whose existence had been so thoroughly taken for granted by residents that it was never thought necessary to describe them to anyone. Residents of Orvieto did not write about their underground city for the same reason that residents of any city do not ordinarily describe their kitchens. The city above Orvieto, the one visible from the valley, the one that appeared on maps and in administrative records, the one visitors came to see, was what the city's inhabitants presented to the outside world. The city below was what they actually used. That division had held for over 2,000 years before anyone thought to count the doors. Number 2. Derinkuyu. In 1963, a resident of the Derinkuyu district in Cappadocia in south-central Turkey was renovating a room in his home when he broke through a wall and found a chamber that did not correspond to any room his house had ever contained. He broke through further. More chambers opened beyond the first. He found a passage, and the passage continued into the dark. Turkish authorities were notified, and as investigations spread outward from that first broken wall, the scale of what lay beneath this rural farming district began to emerge. Derinkuyu is a city. It descends through at least 18 levels below the surface to a depth of approximately 60 to 85 meters. The levels are connected by stairways, ramps, and vertical shafts, and throughout the complex, a ventilation system maintains breathable air. A primary shaft running approximately 55 meters down from the surface connected to hundreds of smaller secondary shafts that branch outward to every level simultaneously. The system was not improvised. It was engineered to a specific standard. Measurements suggest that the air supply was calculated to sustain a known number of inhabitants. Wells were sunk to reach groundwater at the lower depths, providing an independent water supply entirely concealed from the surface. At specific points throughout the passages, the corridors narrow to the width of a single person. These narrowings were not structural compromises. The surrounding rock did not require them. They were placed deliberately at intervals and in configurations that forced anyone moving through the passages to slow to single file and to advance without lateral room to swing a weapon. At these narrowed points, circular stone doors were positioned, each carved from a single piece of rock. Some of them, weighing several tons, fitted into channels in the passage floor, so they could be rolled smoothly across the opening. A rolled Derinkuyu door could not be pulled from the outside. The face that faced outward was smooth with no grip possible. It could only be moved from within, where the inner face was carved with a small hole through which a bar or lever could be inserted. A person pressing against a sealed door from outside would find nothing to grip and nothing to see except a flat surface of stone. The complex contained stables, oil and wine presses, large storage chambers, rooms that appear to have been used for meetings or teaching chapels with carved apses, burial chambers, and cisterns. All of it cut from the volcanic tuff of Cappadocia, a material soft enough to work with basic iron tools, but hard enough, once the cut surfaces dried, to bear the load of the rock above without structural supports. The complex has been estimated to have sheltered up to 20,000 people, along with their livestock and provisions, for extended periods without any access to the surface. A tunnel running approximately 8 kilometers connects Derinkuyu to a second underground city at Kaimakli, meaning the two systems could be used as a single network populations and resources moving between them without appearing above ground at any point along the route. The origin of Derinkuyu is not settled. Some scholars have proposed Hittite origins in the 2nd millennium BCE. Others point to the Phrygians, who controlled this region in the 8th and 7th centuries BCE. What is agreed is that early Christian communities used the city extensively during Roman persecution. In the 1st through 4th centuries CE, hiding here in numbers large enough to hold regular religious services in the underground chapels, whose apses are still carved into the rock walls. The city remained in use through the Arab raids of the 7th to 10th centuries, serving again the function its builders had designed it for, a place where an entire community could disappear from the surface of the earth until a threat passed. It was subsequently sealed and forgotten. The Turkish government opened it to the public in 1969, 6 years after the first wall was broken through. An urban center of this scale was built in the rock beneath a farming district used across multiple centuries and multiple civilizations for the same basic purpose, then closed from the inside and forgotten to the point where a man renovating a single room had no idea it was there. The circular stone doors that could only be moved from within are still in the passages where they were last positioned. The ventilation shafts that kept tens of thousands of people breathing in the dark are still functional. The chapel carved into the rock at the 2nd level still has the shape of an apse at the end of a nave. The city is still there, intact, waiting in the same state it was in when the last person rolled the last door closed from the inside and climbed back up to the surface. Whatever it was that made going underground necessary has not come back. Not yet. Number 1. The Hal Saflieni Hypogeum. Sometime in the second half of the 4th millennium BCE, on a small limestone hill in what is now the town of Paola on the island of Malta, people began cutting downward into the rock. They were working with stone and bone tools. This is documented by the tool marks that survive on the carved surfaces, and they were working in conditions that we cannot quite reconstruct. The hypogeum has no natural light source below the uppermost level. What illumination existed came from small pottery lamps burning animal fat, which would have cast a radius of perhaps 2 or 3 feet and consumed the air around them as they burned. The people who cut these chambers worked in near darkness, navigating by touch, and by the intimacy that comes from returning to the same space hundreds of times. They knew this rock the way you know a room you have lived in for years. They cut one level, then cut through its floor to reach a second level below, then through that to reach a third. The chambers they carved grew progressively more refined as they descended. The upper level closest to the surface is the most utilitarian access passages and chambers without elaborate shaping. The middle level, which is the largest and most architecturally developed, contains rounded recesses, corbelled ceilings, and precisely cut niches that echo in miniature the architecture of the above-ground megalithic temples being constructed elsewhere on Malta during the same centuries. The builders of the hypogeum were replicating underground the structural vocabulary of the temples. Above the same trilithon forms, the same corbelled recesses, the same careful alignment of chambers cut into limestone at depths where no one outside would see them. At the deepest level a pit, and into that pit over the course of roughly 1,500 years, the builders and their descendants placed their dead. By the time the site was abruptly abandoned, around 2500 BCE, the bones of approximately 7,000 individuals had been deposited within the hypogeum. Many were coated in red ochre. Personal ornaments and carved objects had been placed alongside the remains, among them a small reclining female figure, known as the Sleeping Lady, carved in clay with a level of naturalistic detail that has no parallel in the Maltese archaeological record. The hypogeum was the primary burial and ritual space produced by the Maltese temple-building culture across its entire span. And then, for reasons the physical evidence does not record, the culture stopped using it. The entrance was not sealed. The space was simply not entered again. In 1902, a stonemason in Paola was cutting foundations for a row of houses when his work broke through the Hypogeum's roof. Construction continued for a period before the discovery was formally reported. By the time authorities were informed, significant portions of the uppermost level had been damaged beyond recovery. The site passed into public ownership by the end of 1903, and excavation continued until 1911. The finds from that work established the chronology and function of the site. They did not resolve everything. One chamber within the Hypogeum, reached through a low opening in a middle-level wall, has been known as the Oracle Room since at least 1920. That year, William Arthur Griffiths, writing for National Geographic magazine, noted that any word spoken into a particular carved niche in this chamber was amplified and audible throughout the entire underground structure. The observation was documented, but not formally studied until decades later. In 2017, Rupert Till of the University of Huddersfield published acoustic research demonstrating that the Oracle Room produces pronounced resonance at two specific frequencies, approximately 70 Hz and 114 Hz. These frequencies fall within the lower range of adult male voices, bass and baritone registers specifically. A male voice held at the correct position within the Oracle Room generates a resonance that travels through the Hypogeum's chambers and can be perceived throughout the complex. Voices in higher registers produce no comparable effect. The architecture responds measurably and specifically to a particular range of human sound and does not respond to others. Whether this was built in deliberately from the beginning or discovered and then refined by the people who returned to this space across generations, the physical evidence cannot determine. What can be said is that the Oracle Room's carved surfaces include decorative detail, ochre spirals, carefully shaped niches within niches that serves no structural purpose. These were not cuts made to remove material. They were cuts made to finish something. The chamber was not excavated and left. It was worked until it was complete. The people who cut it in the dark knew what complete meant for this specific space, and they reached it. The Hal Saflieni Hypogeum has been a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1980. Access is restricted to approximately 80 visitors per day to protect the chambers from the humidity of human breath, which accumulated over time damages the stone's surface. The bones of the 7000 are no longer in the pit where they were deposited. They have been distributed across research collections and museum storage. The sleeping lady is in the National Museum of Archaeology in Valletta. The Oracle Room is empty. The resonance is still there. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.